You know, when we look at the wrenching conflict in the Middle East, a lot of people think it all started in 1948 with the creation of Israel. But the real story, the roots of it all, they go back way further, to the middle of World War I, and a story of secret deals, imperial games, and a bunch of promises Britain made that it could never hope to keep.
So how on earth did a war fought in the muddy trenches of Europe end up planting the seeds for a conflict that is still tearing the Middle East apart today? Well, the answer lies in a series of contradictory promises, promises that were simply impossible to fulfill all at once.
Okay, so picture this. It's late 1914. World War I is just a horrific, bloody stalemate on the Western Front. Britain is desperate for a win, any kind of breakthrough. So they come up with this indirect strategy. Instead of just throwing more men at the German lines, they decide to go after their enemy's weakest link, the huge but fading Ottoman Empire. This was what they called attacking the soft underbelly.
And to pull this off, Britain decided to fight a war on two fronts. One would be with guns and soldiers, sure, but the other would be fought with diplomacy, with spies, and with a powerful new idea that was sweeping across the region: nationalism.
And what's so fascinating here is how one kind of nationalism actually lit a fire under another. You see, the young Turks who took power in the Ottoman Empire were Turkish nationalists. They tried to force their culture on everyone, and that just sparked this powerful awakening among the Arabs, who started dreaming of their own independent nation. By 1915, British intelligence looked at this movement and saw a weapon they could use.
And that whole idea of weaponizing nationalism, well, it all kicked off with a very, very big promise made to the Arab people.
The British knew they needed a credible leader, a real figurehead to rally an Arab revolt. And they found the perfect guy, Sheriff Hussein of Mecca. Now, this guy had serious credentials. He was a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad and the guardian of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. He had huge prestige. And, just as importantly, he had huge ambition.
And his vision wasn't small time. Hussein wasn't talking about some local uprising. He was talking about liberating Arab lands, building a new national state. He wanted to be the king of a new, unified Arab nation, which made him the absolute perfect partner for Britain's plans.
So, the deal gets hammered out. In a series of famous letters, Britain officially pledges to support an independent Arab state if Hussein leads a revolt against the Turks. For the Arabs, this was it. This was their moment. They were finally fighting for their own freedom, and they had the backing of a global superpower.
But here's where the story takes a really dark turn, because while Arab forces were getting ready to fight and die for this promise, a totally different conversation was happening in secret, thousands of miles away in London and Paris.
Just try to wrap your head around this for a second. You have Arab soldiers risking their lives out in the desert, believing they're fighting for their own independent nation. And at the exact same time, British and French diplomats are literally in a back room drawing lines on a map and carving up that very same land for themselves.
The contrast is just staggering. On the one hand, you have the public promise of Arab independence, and on the other, you have the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was a classic imperial land grab designed to benefit Britain and France, not the Arab people. The agreement was pretty straightforward. The blue zone, which is modern-day Syria and Lebanon, would go to France. The pink zone, Iraq, went to Britain, who were very interested in its oil. And Palestine, the yellow zone, was supposed to get some kind of international control. The point is, none of this, not one bit of it, looked like the unified Arab state they had promised to Hussein.
But believe it or not, Britain's double dealing wasn't done yet. As the war dragged on, they made a third promise. And this one, concerning the land of Palestine, would turn out to be the most explosive of them all.
So, to understand this next promise, you have to understand Zionism. It was a political movement born in 19th century Europe, largely as a response to centuries of violent anti-Semitism. The core goal was to create a national home, a safe haven for the Jewish people in their ancient biblical homeland of Palestine. And here is a critical piece of context. In 1914, before any of these big wartime promises, the Jewish community made up just 8% of Palestine's population. The overwhelming majority of people living there were Arabs.
So you have to ask, why would Britain make a promise to this tiny minority? Well, the British Prime Minister, Lloyd George, had this really exaggerated and frankly stereotypical view of global Jewish influence. He figured that if Britain supported the Zionists, powerful Jewish communities in America and Russia would push their governments to stay in the war and help the Allies win.
And so we get to the ultimate contradiction. In 1917, Britain issues the Balfour Declaration, promising to support a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The same land they had already implicitly promised would be part of an Arab nation, and the same land they had already secretly agreed to carve up with the French. The stage for conflict was now officially set. When the war finally ended, this tangled, impossible web of promises began to unravel, and it left behind a bitter legacy of betrayal. The whole thing blew up thanks to the Russian Revolution. When the Bolsheviks took over, they wanted to embarrass their old allies, so they just opened up the Tsar's secret archives and published everything, including the Sykes-Picot Treaty. The secret was out. You can just imagine the shock and anger in the Arab world. They suddenly had proof that their great British allies had been making deals with the French behind their backs, promising away the very land they were bleeding for.
At the Versailles Peace Conference after the war, any Arab hopes for independence were just crushed. President Wilson's famous idea of self-determination for all peoples, that apparently didn't apply to them. Instead, those secret Sykes-Picot lines were just made official under something called the Mandate System, which was basically colonialism with a new name. Britain and France got to rule the exact territories they had claimed years earlier.
And if you really want to understand the mindset behind all this, you just have to read this shockingly blunt memo from Arthur Balfour himself. He wrote that Zionism was just flat out more important than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who were already living there. Their wishes were just an inconvenience.
So when you boil it all down, it comes to this. To win a war, Britain made 3 promises that could never, ever coexist. They promised independence to the Arabs. They promised territory to the French. And they promised a homeland to the Zionists, all concerning the same overlapping pieces of land. It was a strategy for short-term victory that basically guaranteed a century of conflict. These decisions, made in secret over 100 years ago, didn't just draw the borders of the modern Middle East. They set 2 powerful national movements on a collision course. And it leaves us with one final, vital question. How can we possibly understand the conflict today without first understanding this deep, foundational history of broken promises?